Welcome to the Doctors and Dollars podcast. I'm your host, Nate Crannell, here with my guest today, Dr. Todd Otten. How are you today?
I'm fantastic. Excited to be here. Beautiful day here in mid-Michigan. So thanks for having me.
You betcha. I'm going to read a little bio about you just so our guests know and our listeners know who you are. So, Todd, you are a husband, father, and a board-certified family physician in the great state of Michigan, co-founder of Our Quadruple Aim, a movement that challenges the status quo in healthcare, promotes the patient experience, quality care, lower costs, and provider wellness. You have over 20 years of experience in providing quality patient care, leading teams, and managing various projects in various settings, including the United States Navy, which we'll talk about today, where he was honored as a naval flight surgeon in the year 2006 for the Atlantic Fleet. You're also co-author of the Ripple of Change, a book that shares your unfiltered journey through the burnout and the existing dysfunction in healthcare and offers a bare bones approach to evaluate, reimagine, and inspire positive disruption in the industry and beyond. That's a great bio.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I suppose it's been a fun journey to this point, and actually, I feel like we're kind of just getting started here with the recent endeavor with the book for sure.
That's awesome. Well, we're definitely going to talk about the book today. I feel like that's the most recent thing, right? Like you said, let's go back. Give me the genesis of Todd Otten, like where you grew up, what drove you to become a physician?
For sure. So I grew up in Southeast Michigan, just a little bit south of Detroit. And really the seeds for wanting to become a physician and help other people started pretty early on. I always did well in science and math in school. In fact, I used to get in trouble when I would just go write the answer on the board and the teacher would say, "Well, where's your work?" And I would respond with, "Well, is the answer wrong?" And I suppose that probably is a little bit of foreshadowing to some of my troublemaking these days. Um, but the reality is, I did a Parks and Rec program, and I really enjoyed um, leading the children and caring for them and teaching for them. And so then I started to think about, well, what could I do in my adult life? And medicine kind of jumped out at me. I always wanted a challenge, and becoming a physician seemed like that. And so in the end, it was a beautiful thing because I really, really loved seeing patients. So that was really the genesis of becoming a physician.
That's awesome. So go through high school. Sounds like a bit of a troublemaker, but that's all right. You had good grades, I'm sure. You jumped into the Navy. Tell me about that.
Sure. That was actually, so I graduated college. Well, I guess I'll back up into high school. Sort of the athletic guy who also got good grades, was fortunate to do a lot of wonderful things. And actually, I ran track in college,
Oh,
which is where
nice.
I met my lovely wife. And ironically, our son is very good. And anyways, I digress a little bit. But the reality was getting into the Navy occurred from a random phone call. I had finished college just a little bit early, one semester, and I was working at BASF, which is a big chemical company. And I was working in the quality assurance department, and I was on midnight shift because I was the one running the quality assurance lab, and got a phone call from a Navy recruiter who was, I'm half awake, and he's telling me all these things. And finally, I was like, "Oh, I'm planning to go into medical school," and that led into a whole different level of excitement. And I was like, "Look, send me some stuff in the mail and I will read it. And if I'm interested, I'll get back to you." And next thing you know, I signed up. And really, looking back on that, that was one of the key components that allowed me to have some more financial freedom in my career. For sure, it delayed when I started residency. And at that time, it was a little difficult because a lot of my friends were attendings. But fast forward 20 years now, um, I'm the one that has the flexibility with my finances as opposed to a lot of my colleagues who have that big debt burden from medical school. So a fascinating twist to the journey for sure.
Yeah, so I'm familiar with the traditional path of college, medical school, residency. Did you go through technically medical school was through the Navy then?
So I went to medical school at Wayne State. There was really
Mhm.
two paths you could go to: the health professional scholarship program, which is what I did, where they would cover any school around the country if you got accepted. And then there was also the I think it's USHIS. I might be butchering that acronym. Where that's a military medical school, if you will. So I did the
Mhm.
former, and basically what happened is I was commissioned right before I started school. They paid for school and actually got a bit of a living stipend while you're in school. So you would come out of medical school not only debt free, um, but also potentially with a little bit of a savings if you were intelligent about it. So that's the program I did. And then really what's happening then is you're paying back that investment by the military in time. And
Mhm.
so I did a year of general surgery because I thought I wanted to be a trauma surgeon. Realized that surgery probably wasn't my thing. So that digression in my career path was a true blessing, because I then became a flight surgeon, which is a total misnomer. It's really primary care for the pilots, the air crew, the navigators, what have you. That's when I really fell in love with family medicine. And so after I paid back my time in the Navy, which was 5 years of active duty, I came back, finished my residency at St. John, and then from there was able to get really a dream job at Hayes Green Beach Memorial Hospital near Lansing. So
It's awesome. What time frame is it then that you're coming out of the Navy and getting into Lansing?
absolutely. So I graduated medical school 2002, and then I got a little bit of credit for residency from my time in the Navy. So my residency was really 2.5 years. So I finished in December/January of 2010, and then at the end of that month started my job, and then I was there for 13 years till the end of 2022 when I stepped away.
It's awesome. And you had mentioned going into the Navy and being able to be essentially the primary provider for the pilots and the guys on the boat. What drove you then when once you got out of the Navy and you got the dream job, um, family physician, family medicine, what attracts you to that? I mean, obviously you're a family man, married kids, but tell me about that.
Yeah, so I joke a lot when I was in the squadron, VP-10, as it were, that it was like being a doctor in a fraternity.
Mhm.
The reality is, a lot of the pilots and stuff were in their mid to late 20s, um, and so lots of energy, lots of type A's. When they worked, they worked hard. When they played hard. And I'll leave it at that. But you got to know everybody really well, right? And it was like a family, and I loved it. I would walk down to the mess in the squadron to get a cup of coffee, and it would take an hour sometimes because I would get stopped along the way. Hey doc, I got this rash, or hey doc, I did
Yeah,
this whatever, and so I would, do my best to answer those questions. And I'm like, sick hall's like 50 yards away and I'm here all the time. And so it really drew me to the primary care aspect. And then when I got out, I really wanted the leadership component as well. And so I really looked for a job that was going to blend, the opportunities as a physician, but also as a leader. And I interviewed at 5 places, but Hayes Green Beach seemed like the natural fit. I really appreciated the CEO at the time, and ultimately it did. I was chief of staff, and I was medical director for an ACO, which is an accountable care organization, and got to do a lot of the things I wanted to do. However, when you try and save the world, it tends to start to add up, and leads to things like burnout. For a good part of 8 or 9 years, my job was magical. It really was.
for sure. Because I mean, during this whole time, that 8 or 9 years of magic, you're married at this point, starting a family. There's a lot of other things outside of being in leadership and having that dream job that weigh you down. So that's a good segue into when we talked. It was 2019, correct? You experienced some significant physician burnout. So what were some of the main factors that you think attributed to that? And was this something that you were seeing in peers and colleagues around you, or do you feel like it was pretty honed in on you?
Yeah, so I'll answer the latter part first. I think
Mhm.
unfortunately, and the statistics bear it out, that burnout is all too pervasive in not only then, but really it's accelerating, and there are so many factors to this that really aren't unique to me necessarily. They just overlap with everybody. But I'll definitely dive into my journey, because the reality is it's my life is literally an open book now.
Yeah.
But I so I was trying to do too much. That was part of it. I had every leadership hat you could think of at a small hospital. I was seeing literally about 6,000 visits a year, which is a tremendous amount for a family physician. I think from an RVU perspective, my peak was about 7,500, which is just a huge amount. About 50% probably more than the average currently, I think, last I checked. But beyond that, you talk about the EMR, the electronic medical record, the clerical burdens, those weigh heavy on you. And then you factor in things like prior authorization and all these demands that are coming down on you from not only administration, but insurers and everybody telling you how to do your job. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Did all of you go to medical school? Like,
Right.
why is everybody else who's not a physician telling me what to do? Like, how did we get here? Like, this is crazy. Like, and so it got to the point, even with some of the prior auths, I would get somewhat flippant with my responses with like, the rejection would be, did a cardiologist review that, or did a cardiologist whatever, and I would respond with a handwritten note, did a cardiologist review this, and put a smiley face, and invariably it would get approved. But like, when you start to add all those things, it's just one more and one more and one more. And in our training, we're taught to be resilient, we're taught to be self-reliant, we're taught to compartmentalize. And all those things are super important. But when you've got all these competing factors vying for your time, and the visits are getting condensed and condensed and condensed, and the clerical burdens are just raising, super problematic. And ultimately, you've got a patient in front of you who you're trying to do your best for. And it is crushing when it gets to the point that you're struggling so much that you cannot give your best to the person sitting in front of you. And that's when the bucket starts to overflow. And that's when it becomes super frustrating. And you get angry at the drop of a hat. And you're not giving your best. And you're not being the father you want to be. And it's heartbreaking. I remember I'm looking out in my backyard right now. And I remember sitting out, but we have a river in the backyard, just crying when the crap hit the fan, so to speak, that the job I love was sucking the life out of me.
Mhm.
And it's hard to not hold back, to hold back the tears now, because I know hundreds of thousands of my colleagues are going through the same thing, and how many of those colleagues are now gone because they couldn't handle it. The
Yeah.
suicide rates in physicians are just ridiculous. So yeah, I know that was kind of a long answer, but you just, hopefully I'm imparting the emotion that really burnout creates, because I'm almost crying now, and it's been 4 years now.
Yeah. No, that's great, Todd. I mean, don't ever apologize for a long-winded answer because that's exactly what the listeners need to hear. That's what they want to hear. And it really comes down to the idea of like it's not the old way of doing medicine. If you went back and talked to somebody back in probably like say the 1950s, it was you sit down with a patient, you diagnose what they need, and you prescribe the remedy, right? And it's very straightforward, and it's that interpersonal relationship between the two of you, and there's that trust. And I've talked with many other physicians that have shared the same thing as you, that they just there's a lot of hoops to jump through now. And then there's health insurance companies who feel like they're physicians, and they're essentially acting like they practice medicine. And the restrictions that you guys have, I can completely understand why the burnout would happen. I'm surprised that it's not more prevalent in the media. And I know it's really discussed within the physician community, amongst your peers. You guys are talking about it, but it's one of those things where I don't know. It needs to get out there. So you just sharing what you did is fantastic. I certainly commend you for it.
Well, and if I may piggyback on that a little bit, and
Absolutely.
that's I I joke that I probably was meant to practice medicine in the 1950s and write everything on 3x5 cards, and this probably would have never happened.
Yeah. Right.
Um, but yeah, for sure. In fact, I used to be at the board meetings, and one of the older physicians would say, "Oh, the young docs, you guys aren't tough enough." And finally, I was like, I won't say his name, but I was like, "Doctor So and So, you used to write everything on a 3x5 card. Now a note to see somebody for a cold is 4 pages long, and he never brought it up again." Um, and actually, he and I kind of became really good friends after that. But I was going to make the point that, one of the things we intentionally did in the book is with our Quadruple Aim, which obviously we'll get to, we talked about provider wellness. And I know we were talking about physicians, but Joshua, my co-author, and I feel very strongly about the word provider, because the burnout issues you talk about, they go way beyond just physicians. It affects everybody top to bottom, nurses, dietary, maintenance, the administration. It's everywhere, and it's a major problem. And the real downside to that is we're not delivering the care that we should be. You look at the statistics, our mortality rates are going down despite our expenditure being through the roof. I mean, it's a non-sustainable path that needs to change for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I just think back to when I was a kid, in the early 90s. I lived in a small town in Western Iowa. We had the one physician, Dr. Ahrens. He's awesome. I'm sure he'll listen to this at some point in the future. But it was very, like, one-on-one. Obviously, my parents are in the room with me, but I just remember it was like there wasn't a lot. And it was, you said the 3x5 note card, like that is true. He sat down, as my mom is talking, or as I'm talking about what's going on, he's writing some things down. He says, here's what I think it is. I'm going to, send you a prescription. You go down to the drugstore down the street, and there you are. And it's super easy. And I just feel like I haven't been to the doctor in my hometown in, a couple of decades now, but I mean, I got to imagine that the world has just changed, let's say in the last 20 years, probably since you first got into medicine, that, it's just, it's slowly moved away from the, in your point, provider patient relationship, and it's become more, industry is the best word that I can think of right now. Would you agree with that?
I would, and I hear the term profits over people quite a bit,
Mm,
and unfortunately, I think there's a lot of truth to that. In the book, I should say we, Joshua and I, really drive home the point of the problems that the financial drivers have created in the healthcare industry. So yeah, absolutely, and I think things have really been accelerated even in the past couple years, with the pandemic, in terms of the issues that created. A lot of I One of the comments I make in the book is that it's like we threw gas on an already smoldering fire, or the cinders, if you will.
for sure. Hey, great segue, because I was actually going to ask you about the pandemic. So 2020 hits March. Financially, we're seeing that, large hospitals, large, medical corporations are receiving all of this COVID money, right? And then, they're changing their fiscal years and their financial planning based on, all this COVID money coming in. How did that affect you, as a family physician in 2020 with the COVID pandemic? How did that affect you? I mean, that's kind of the burnout's kind of happening. So, I mean, emotionally, that's probably even a bigger driver. But how did it also affect you guys financially?
Uh, Personally, I was an employed physician, so I didn't see a huge change for me. I know that some of the hospital's finances um, were affected, and it could have been one way or another, depending. And at that point, I had gotten a little bit out of the administration role, so I probably can't speak to it
Okay,
on the granular level, if you will. I think there was some good and some bad that came out of it for sure. I think telehealth and telemedicine as a result of that was one of the biggest wins, I would say.
for sure,
Personally, I was a little bit, I don't know, I guess reluctant at the beginning, for a couple reasons. One, I wasn't used to it. And two, there was a lot of my patients that didn't know how to get on a video screen. So the reality is, I know the finances were better to do the video visits, but I wasn't willing to. Go through the headache of trying to figure out how to get an 80-year-old to connect on a Zoom call. So I
yeah,
predominantly did telephone calls, despite my administration probably not being thrilled with that. But you know what? Like, I'm a doctor. I'm not an IT guy, right? And so, but the beauty of it was, if you, at least in my case, with enough experience, I could probably do 95% of what I could do in person, just talking to somebody. And
hmm,
again, it's the beauty of family medicine. You know your patients very well, and even just in a conversation, you could do a lot. So I know the question was how it negatively impacted the finances from a personal perspective. Not so much. Just kind of steady Eddie for me, I suppose. From a larger perspective, I know it was a bit of a roller coaster for the bigger institutions for sure.
yeah, for sure. No, and the IT versus I mean, we want you to be really good at medicine, right? We don't want you to become an IT expert. As a former financial advisor, I always told clients, like, I don't want you to become an expert in finances. Like, that's what I'm here to help you with. I wouldn't expect the same from you. You know, if I came in to visit you for some medical reason, you know, I'd want you laser focused on doing what you do best, and then I can focus on what I do best. But I mean, a lot of it is just conversation, right? You said 95% of it is just talking to someone. And as a financial advisor, that's what I did as well, was just talk to someone. And so when COVID hit, yeah, my business model kind of changed a little bit. It became very much, you know, Zoom and virtual meetings. Again, that I didn't work with 80-year-olds, but even let's call it a 60-year-old who's wanting to sit down for an hour and talk about retirement, and retirement's coming up in 5 years, to try and get them on a Zoom meeting. Yeah, I mean, we scheduled it for 9 a.m. We probably weren't really talking until about 9:10, you know, trying to sort them out and get them on virtually.
Well, for sure, and I mean, and if you think about it as a physician, we've got appointments every 15 to 20 minutes. And
Sure.
if you're spending 10 minutes just trying to figure out how to get somebody connected, and granted, I am far from an IT expert. I will fully admit that. So some of it was probably
Same.
the whiffing factor that I just didn't want to go through the headache of it. But it snowballs your day, and you wonder how, patients can be waiting for an hour or two, or even worse, if you're adding all these layers of delay throughout the day. So yeah, there were some challenges there for sure, for sure.
For sure. Awesome. Well, I'm gonna take a shift. The big things that I really want to talk about, and what we want to really dive into, you know, in today's conversation, are the book and the OQR or OQA, excuse me. So, first, tell me about the new book, Ripple of Change. You know, just like this podcast is mixing a financial professional with physicians, which is kind of a unique perspective. When you wrote this book, Ripple of Change, your co-author is actually a former patient of yours. So it seems like such a unique perspective to have a physician and a former patient collaborate and put together what is it, like 500-page book. Tell me about how did that come about? Kind of give me the, you know, the Reader's Digest version of how you two first works, you know, from a physician patient standpoint, but then how did this book come about? Because it's very interesting to me.
For sure. First thing I'll say, I suppose, is well, I'll show you the cover just because we're super proud of
Oh,
the cover
it's
there.
such a good
Lot
one. I like it.
lot of symbolism there, with the caduceus and the water, and not only that, I'll point out the yin and yang pill capsule there. I'm doing a really bad job with this. See, I'm not an IT expert. Anyways, but yeah, to answer your question, there's a couple reasons why the book is a little bit longer. I think in part it's really
Dollars podcast. I'm the CFO of Grand Vision Capital Group. At Grand Vision, we work with high income earners who make a great living, but still can't quite break through that true wealth ceiling. We utilize strategically chosen investments tailored for high income earners. The question always at the forefront of our minds is, why wait for retirement to finally live when you can implement an investment strategy that will impact your life today? To be honest, most of the people we work with never even knew these options existed because their financial planner doesn't have access to these exclusive investments. So, if you're ready to finally turn your high income into real wealth, visit our website, www.grandvision.co, and hit the Take Action button in the top right corner to schedule some time with me. Or even better, connect, follow me on any of my social media accounts, shoot me a message. Now, back to the show.
kind of two books into one, and maybe even three if you think about it. And the other issue for the length is, and this is important because I think for some people when they say, "Oh my gosh, it's a long book," it's really easy to read from what we've heard in terms of feedback. And the font's actually a little bit bigger because my co-author has a retinal issue. Joshua has a
Yeah,
retinal issue, and so it's not like microfiche. It's actually a very very readable book. Page turner for some, I suppose. But the reality is that this really evolved kind of at the tail end of my burnout. I had written a poem called Medicine is a World of Gray in 2021, which is really kind of a look and saying, things are not black and white in healthcare. And all too often they're seen that way. And that creates a lot of domino effects, not in a good way. Bit of a dark poem as I was coming out of that time. And then I started writing a chapter called Anatomy of Burnout, where I really ripped the cover off what happens to a physician when they're struggling. And I felt it was important to get it out there in the public eye because a lot of people don't understand what's happening with their provider potentially. I mean, literally between patients, my headaches were so bad with cluster headaches. I would be sitting in my office with an oxygen mask on my face to try and get the pain to go down. And then 2 minutes later, I'm walking into a room trying to give somebody my best. I mean, that is the definition of lunacy if you think about
Yeah.
it.
So difficult.
Uh, right. And so fortunately that didn't last too long. And the headaches got better with a medicine called duloxetine, which is actually primarily indicated for mood disorders, but it really has a lot of benefit for people with neuropathic pain. And so I had a horrendous 2-year stint with post-concussive headaches where I had a headache essentially every day. And finally they got better. And so, as a result of my success with that medication, I would offer it to my patients for neuropathic pain, which is what Joshua had. He had pretty bad cervical radiculopathy, which is basically a pinched nerve in the neck with pain going down his arm. And we tried all kinds of stuff, including that medication. Unfortunately, that medication essentially devastated him from a health perspective. It created so many problems, complete opposite end of the spectrum for me. So you see how the yin and the yang starts to
Yeah.
come into play because it was the exact same medicine at the exact same dose. So fast forward a little bit, it was getting to the point where I knew there was a problem, but I couldn't fix it. And I started to think about, mindfulness and stress relief and alternative things and holistic things and suggesting things like acupuncture and yoga for him to get pain relief. And I started telling him about our quadruple aim and what that was and explained the four tenets of it, which I might as well say what they are. It's patient experience, quality care, lower costs, and provider wellness. And Josh is a bright, articulate guy. And I'm like, you know what? It would be very interesting to see what he comes up with because I was dabbling with the idea of having people include different things, patients, doctors, administrators, their different viewpoints, so that it's not just me, one burned out, frustrated physician complaining to the world, but rather, multitude of inputs. And he said, well, what should I write about? And I said, just write. That's the
Nice.
only instruction I
Keep it
gave him. And
simple.
yeah, and he wrote something that was beautiful and amazing, really. And I was like, Josh, we got to talk. We got to have a meeting. At this point, we were just doctor and patient, and I had been taking care of him for about 10 years. And we went, had a couple beers and talked about it for about 3 hours. And that's when the yin and yang philosophy came up from Joshua. And this was very early on. And then we started talking about, well, maybe we can weave our story together. And fast forward 18 months, we wrote a 500 plus page book that we're super proud of, and we really feel like it has a potential to make some major not only ripples but waves in our system because people need to be inspired and they need to be empowered and they need to feel like their voice is important. And it is, because if you think about it, if we can get millions of people saying the same stuff, it is going to be very difficult to ignore that amount of the population who is screaming for change and reform.
Absolutely. And with the four quadrants that make up the quadruple aim, right? I think two are really important. One being the one that everyone expects, right? Patient care. Like that as you go to your doctor, you expect there's that level of trust, there's the expertise that you carry and that you're going to provide good patient care. And so when people think healthcare, they think of the patients and they think of the quality of care that they should be provided, whether that's because what they're paying for health insurance, what a doctor is charging them to receive that care. uh, Patient care is always been in the forefront. What I love that you added was that there's provider care, and really that has to come from the burnout that you experience. But I mean, understanding that there is a need for provider care as well, and to protect that portion of it. And so, as you were putting together these quadrants, tell me about the provider care part and why that was an important piece that needed to be one of those four.
Oh, absolutely. So actually, ironically enough, the provider wellness preceded my burnout.
Oh, wow.
And I
Okay.
think yeah, I think some of that was actually a little bit self-serving, if you will.
Mhm.
So when I was an ACO medical director, again, for those that don't know, it's accountable care organization. In 2016 is roughly when I was introduced to the quadruple aim. And immediately I was like, holy smokes, this is genius, right? I mean, patient experience, right? We want patients to have a good experience,
Mhm.
regardless of the circumstances. We want quality care. We want lower or reasonable costs, right? And we want provider wellness because, and when you have those things, it's magical. And so when
Mhm.
I first heard that, I was like, I was an army of one. I was chief of staff, and I'm like, I talked about it nonstop. But the beauty of it was by doing that, our critical access rural hospital, we lived the quadruple aim for the better part of, I would say, 2 years. Um, and the interesting part of it, the finances for the hospital were doing tremendous. Think about it, right? If somebody comes into your institution and they have a good experience and they're not getting buried with all these costs, they're going to want to come back. And you're potentially going to have a customer or patient, if you will, for life, right?
Mhm.
But all too often, we've got this myopic view on the profits, like we're a publicly traded company. Like, what's the ROI going to be for getting a psychiatrist? Like, really? Like, why do we need to justify getting a psychiatrist for a physician group of like 300? I write about that in the book, by the way. But
Mhm.
the reality of it is, every study out there shows that if your staff and providers are doing well, all those other buckets tend to fall in line. You spend less on recruitment and retention. The patients are satisfied, so they come back, so that the dollars that they are spending are within your institution, right? And you probably don't even need to market if you think about it, if all these
Mhm.
things are clicking, because you're going to be busting at the seams. I mean, anecdotally, I hadn't taken patients to a large degree for about 5 years, and always had new patients coming in or wanting to get into the office, and we didn't market at all. Why is that? Word of mouth is a powerful tool. So, yeah, to answer your question, huge, huge component, and it's so desperately needed across the country to address the burnout issues and what have you. So,
For sure. If you were to marry the two together, the book Ripple of Change that you did with Josh, the our quadruple aim, and that mindset, and really the what I would call a movement of, if everyone jumps on board with this, and I love the ripple, the pebble analogy that you give. Everyone just go find a pond, throw in a pebble. This ripple of change can create waves, right, within our industry. Um, marrying those two together, and those two ideas, like, what do you think is going to be the catalyst for seeing significant change, in the healthcare industry?
so I think the catalyst is there. Like, you've got 300 plus million people who are frustrated, right? The issue I've been seeing is we've got these silos of not only care, but also the people that want to transform the system. And I think connectivity and breaking down some of those barriers is going to be key. So, the why, if you will, is there. I feel like our quadruple aim offers a really simple roadmap for
Mhm.
people to just take it and run with it and hopefully get things to a better place. And back to the book, if you will, like, the simple I really need to figure out where my camera is. For those of you who are
Really good.
listening, I'm struggling to center the book in the frame. But there's a lot of symbolism on the cover of the book, with the caduceus just touching the water and spreading out those little ripples. And I totally agree with you. I mean, we were very intentional with that choice. And I got to give credit to Joshua and his wife, Megan, for driving the cover of the book and the title of the book, because I was kind of stuck on the our quadruple aim and that metamorphosis of trying to involve everybody. But the reality
Yeah.
is, that's the roadmap, right? The why is everybody's frustrated. The how is everybody can play their part to create a little ripple. And if we're all doing it and all asking appropriate questions and all discussing why the medications are so expensive at the pharmacy, or pushing back on the costs with the hospital system, we're going to create a lot of noise, and it's going to be difficult to ignore. So I agree with you. We are very hopeful that this becomes a movement for millions of Americans that have struggled with the current infrastructure.
For sure. And so you see the movement, not necessarily one thing, like, hey, there's this one pebble that needs to be thrown into that pond, and that's going to create the waves. It's really everybody from all the different issues that they're having that kind of align with our quadruple aim, but like a bunch of different pebbles is what's really going to create the change, not one single thing.
100%. And it
Cool.
because the power of one is obviously very important, but Joshua and I are two people. We can't fix everything, and I don't think that there's one simple solution to the $4 trillion mess that we find ourselves in. But I think if you get enough people throwing enough pebbles, and for some, it might be a boulder. Like I definitely know I've thrown at least rocks at times and probably closer to boulders, depending on the circumstances. Yeah, so absolutely. I think if we get enough people that find the right connections, significant change can occur for sure.
That's awesome. Before I shift gears on you, because I mean, it is doctors and dollars, so we're definitely want to talk about the medical side of things, but I also want to get into some investments from you because you do some unique things that I feel like our philosophies align in a lot of different ways. But before we switch gears, where can listeners go out and find Ripple of Change online? Where can they purchase the book?
For sure. So our website is www.ourquadrupleaim.com, traditional spelling. And actually, that's the best place to get it, in my opinion, because typically you'll get a signature from Joshua and myself in the book. It's also available on Amazon as well as Google Play. And we're looking at some additional formats going forward. And fingers crossed for those of you listening. Hopefully, we're going to get our audiobook going here by Christmas. That's the goal.
That's awesome. The audio thing is big. And also go to ourquadrupleaim.com and get the book for Josh and for Todd. I mean, Jeff Bezos has enough money. You don't need to give him any more by booking it through Amazon. So head to their website and get the book there. I want to shift gears for you. The last thing I definitely want to talk to you about, and I saw this online, A10 Investments. So when we were talking earlier, it's a group of friends, some buddies, maybe some other people interwoven in there. But you guys are in alternative investments. A couple of questions that I have around this area. But first, I want to understand kind of the startup of that, because most physicians meet a financial advisor when they get out of residency, or in the early stages of their career. They sit down, they might set up a 401k or an IRA. They're told max this thing out. It's going to, obviously tax deferred income. That's kind of the traditional sense, right? And that's what a lot of physicians do. And that's why a lot of physicians make great money while they're going through their careers. And then they get to retirement and they're like, wow, I cannot maintain a lifestyle that I had before. And I have to drastically reduce that because I didn't save appropriately. What you and these guys that you're with have gotten into alternative investments, which is something obviously as the CFO of Grand Vision Capital Group, we do real estate, which is considered an alternative investment. You guys do something a little bit differently. Talk to me about how that group got started and what it is that you guys are getting into.
For sure. So A10 Investments started as four regular guys with different backgrounds who enjoyed, believe it or not, comic books
Awesome.
and buying and selling them and collecting them. So I guess I was reliving my youth to a certain extent because I'm a big Peter Parker Spider-Man guy. But the reality is, we each took, I think it was $300 at the time, the four of us, and so we had $1,200 in seed money, and we're like, let's see what we can do with this. And we would buy collections and flip them at the local flea market called the Mega Mall, and our booth became is A10, which is where A10 Investments came from.
Nice. I like
But
that.
so it started to really get some traction, and over the course of about 2 years, factor in some crypto investments that we dabbled in, we really actually like 100x that money in about 2 years. Which is obviously a wonderful return. The issue was is we had a lot of this infrastructure under me, and I'm like, we guys, we need to incorporate this because having it under me is not the greatest move. So we did our due diligence and did an LLC, and then we incorporated it. And there was a vision to gather a group of like-minded individuals with either had a high risk tolerance or wanted to be attached to something with a higher risk tolerance, and so then we then incorporated it. And so far it's been brilliant. Despite the fact that we incorporated like right at the peak of the crypto market, we've actually done quite well. And year to date in 2023, I believe we're up at least through the first 2 quarters about 20%. But beyond comic books and other collectibles, and believe it or not, rocks, um, we do stocks, we sell covered calls, cryptocurrency with staking, liquidity pools, NFTs. And so, the interesting thing behind this is, the 401ks and all those things, I think they're wonderful vehicles, right? But there is absolutely nothing wrong with putting certain amounts of dollars in different buckets. And I think as we get into different ways of thinking, different ways of working, my colleagues should really be considering those types of things because there's opportunities out there. And sure, any investment could go to zero. Anything could go to zero. But when things have the potential to go up 10 times or 100 times, or create a steady passive flow of income, that can be magical. There's not a lot of 47-year-old family physicians that had the capacity to walk away from the mess that was going on. And I think there's really a few reasons for that. One was my decision to be in the military and not have a huge student debt. Well, actually, zero student debt. That was a big part
Yeah,
of it. But the capacity for risk tolerance and to tackle some of these other initiatives has allowed me to have the freedom to do what I'm doing now, which is really to advocate for others. And so, yeah, I'm not saying put all your eggs in one basket and Bitcoin's going to go to the moon, so to speak, but
sure.
um, at least entertain those things and look into them for sure.
Yeah, and that's something that I hope listeners always gather from these conversations with physicians, just to understand that like there are the traditional routes, but there is all, like the phrase says, alternative investments that allow you to take a little bit more risk, see a little bit more opportunity for better rate of return. And for you, you've turned it into something fun, right? You've taken your love of Spider-Man as a kid and monetized it, right? Which is pretty unique. Especially from a guest standpoint on our show, definitely something that, I mean, I'm sure a lot of our guests like Spider-Man, but to say, hey, we've turned that into something that we've monetized. I get to do it with a group of friends. It's something that's fun for us, because a lot of physicians, they'll do the traditional stuff with a financial advisor. They might do some, alternative investing that allows them better rate of return, but it might not be something that is fun for them. It's just something they feel like they have to do in order to grow that nest egg. And so I like what you said about the buckets. I use that analogy all the time as an advisor to say, hey, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And there's really a number of buckets that we can leverage, and they all have different uses. Pre-tax, post-tax, access today versus access, after the age of 59 and a half. There's a lot of different dynamics that go into that. And so I commend you for looking at your buddies, probably again over a couple of beers, just sitting down and saying, hey, let's see if we can turn this thing into something. And obviously, if you had 100 exit and even year to date 20% return is fantastic. That's better than the market's doing right now.
Yeah, it's been an amazing journey, and the really cool part of it is we've built this infrastructure that kind of runs itself now. We have a board of 5 individuals, and 4 of them are permanent board members, but then annually one is rotated. We have an annual meeting that's a blend of some teaching, and last year we had a different financial advisor present to the group with a 2023 outlook. And then some fun camaraderie, hanging out, going skiing, you know, things of that nature. So it's just it can be done, and those things are out there. And sure, is there some work to it? 100%, right? But if in the end most of the meetings are fun and you're with your friends, that's time well spent. And oh, by the way, we're setting something up to really create some passive income for a lot of people that really are just along for the ride too,
Yep.
which that's all right too.
Yep. And I think that's the power of alternative investing, right? Is the ability to create some passive income, whether you can do it on a tax-free or taxable basis, whether it's, deferred the tax, but you just have a lot more flexibility in that space to create the passive income, to create a revenue stream today, while you're still in your career, versus I feel like there's just the thought within our society, and I'm not just talking physicians, I'm talking any industry, that you got to save for retirement. And the idea is, you save up and you work hard, you raise your family, and you save for this time in the future, when you're now older, and that's when you get to spend those retirement dollars and all of your savings. And I think that there needs to be a shift in our thinking, and that you can create revenue streams now. You can have fun with it, and there's a lot of different buckets, to use your word again, a lot of different buckets out there that we can maximize what we have going on, and we can create investing revenue today versus waiting until you're, again, 59 and a half, 60. A lot of physicians work till they're like 70. And so I think that's very cool that you've taken action, and you've had fun along the way. That's very cool.
Well, I appreciate that for sure. Interesting, amazing journey. If you told me I'd be sitting here doing podcasts talking about a book that we wrote and alternative investment models, I would say, eh, I don't know that I would have believed it. So yeah, it's been an amazing journey, and I hope these conversations truly inspire other people to not only think about where they're at in their career, but what they can do to help the greater good and how they can use some of their energy, in a way of selfless love too. So.
Absolutely. You ended that perfectly. I'm not going to add anything else to that. So I appreciate you being on the show today, Todd. It was great talking to you. I hope to bump into you soon. Everybody go out and get Ripple of Change. I know I'm going to get my copy here today. I want that signature because that signature might be worth something later.
Well, I don't know about that. We'll see. Thanks so much.
You bet. Good talking to you. Hey, everyone. As we wrap up today's episode, I want to talk about the second opinion. As most of our listeners are physicians, you guys know the importance of having another medical professional's insight for a patient's treatment plan. But have you ever considered having a second opinion on your financial plan? Or have you simply trusted your financial advisor that they've already leveraged every strategy that your family needs to be 100% on track to meet your financial goals? That's why, for my Doctors and Dollars listeners, each Wednesday I block off 3 time slots, an hour each, to provide a free second opinion of their financial plan. During this hour, we'll reevaluate your financial goals and your risk tolerance. We'll ensure tax mitigation strategies are in place and ultimately give you confidence with your financial outlook, because that is what drives a happy home, a happy marriage, and peace of mind. These 3 spots each Wednesday do fill up fast. Send me an email at nate@grandvision.co or head over to www.grandvision.co/second opinion to fill out a quick form about you and schedule a time for us to meet. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope the rest of your week is abundant. Cheers.